Ladies and gentlemen, this is a unique session where I bring to you the golden boys of the industry. In this series, we bring inputs and views of the senior colleagues and leaders who have nurtured our industry over the years and played a key role in its development and evolution. They may have hung their boots from active operational life, but the pearls of wisdom they bring have always been a guiding light for all of us, especially in this crisis situation. I'm honored and super happy to bring to you the first on the series, Shri Rakesh Shah, a life coach, a mentor, marketing and business consultant with over 50 years of experience in various areas of business ranging from engineering, manufacturing, marketing, corporate affairs, and collaborations. Mr. Shah is the former managing director, Winmoller and Holshire India. He has also played a key role in establishment and spread of circular weaving technologies. More so, I chose him as the first guest as today happens to be his birthday. He grows 1 year younger. I take this opportunity, sir, to wish you a very happy birthday from all of us in the industry and pray to the Almighty to always bless you with good health and happiness. I warmly welcome you to the show Insights with Nidhi Verma.
Thank you very much, Nidhi. Thank you for your good wishes. Thank you for giving me the honor. I feel hugely honored that the series is starting with me, and I'm feeling like a boy again, like you called me boy. So thank you very much. Thanks all the viewers who will be watching this video, this interview. And I hope that I would be able to say something that would be of some value. Thank you.
Sir, in your more than half a century of rich experience in work field, you may have come across many incidents which were a crisis. Could you share the most difficult one based on what principle you emerged from it and your lifelong learnings that you made from that experience?
Yes. Well, in such a long time, Nidhi, you have lots of crises in your life, and especially in your work life. And I've had my share of them, of course. But and there are many which were perhaps difficult to choose, which was worse than the other or better than the other. But I would say that something which relates to our own industry, so that everyone can relate. It was the turnaround job I did for the Lohia Group. The market had been lost for their tape lines due to service issues, and there were certain issues because of which the market was lost to local manufacturers. The tape line plant had been temporarily closed. It was not producing, even though, of course, the workers were there. And Mr. Lohia invited me to revive the plant, turn it around. I was at Ahmedabad at that time. I had been away from Kanpur for some years, and I was with Gujarat Heavy Chemicals. When I was invited, I came back, and the task was given to me. Well, I think we did a spectacular job. The turnaround was very effective and wonderful. And I think that we created an organization which has thrived, grown, and has become, as you know, probably one of the largest. And Mr. Lohia said, is the largest in that business. So I'm very proud of it and I'm very happy about it. But let me say one thing to you, that it was all possible because of my colleagues, the employees, the workers, and my managers. It was all their doing. My biggest learnings have been for a leader they have been all in leadership area basically. And I think what I learned was that leader must be able to create, first of all, a culture in the organization which is aligned with the company's goals and with their personal life goals. And therefore, it should give an opportunity for them to grow along with the organization. This was the first big learning I had there. The second big learning was that the leader must earn the trust of the employees. We were in a situation when everybody was worrying because the factory was to be restarted. Everyone was worrying about their jobs. They were not sure of their future, and they needed to have a trusting and trusted boss. This was done, and I think the third biggest lesson which I learned was to trust the people themselves. I realized that if you have motivated the people in the right way, they will actually achieve the impossible, and I mean it.
Rakesh sir, you also played a very key role in the circular weaving technology establishment and expansion in India. What challenges did you face and how did you overcome them?
Well, you see, when we started to bring in the circular weaving technology, it was early 80s. I had just finished completing the technology transfer and the establishment or installation of the first phase of LML Vespa factory. Mr. Lohia was also associated, and Mr. Lohia had also started this company, Lohia Starlinger, in collaboration with Starlinger of Austria, which is, of course, well known at that time, was the biggest single company and was most advanced technology in the field in circular weaving of let's say, woven polypropylene or, let's say, flat tape weaving. So I joined this fledgling company and we worked together, and I think it was a wonderful experience. We faced tremendous amount of resistance, but we had some background. People were using at that time flat looms and dobbies. These were very primitive machines. All the film was made on blown film lines and they were being stretched on small hot plates. There was no polypropylene at that time, and it was very difficult to use these bags because in certain applications, for example, cement, which was the biggest application, that is filled, usually it is filled hot. And when you fill hot, the HDP bags used to fail or they would extend. So this new technology had to be brought in. Mr. H.G. Bajaj, everyone knows him as Bauji. He is a pioneering entrepreneur in this business. And he had 4 machines from Saint Fairs of France, the company which has closed very long ago. So for us, the big challenge was to explain the technology and its benefit to people, because the machines we were offering, the technologies we were offering, had no relationship with, in terms of price, in terms of technology, in terms of learning, in terms of outputs, with what they had been using before. This was totally a different ballgame. It was a new word for them. And therefore, I think it was quite an uphill task because people have a natural fear of unknown. And they had to overcome this. So the first big order came from Paharpur, and I remember very well that we were sitting in Calcutta Club and Mr. Sarup was sitting there for negotiations, and I hand wrote a 20 or 25 page contract. It was, I think, in the company's files, it would still be there. It was probably the only handwritten contract there with which we started. So it was a fantastic time. The trip stretching lines came from Windmuller because they were associated with Starlinger at that time. They worked together. So we had to prove that it was proven, and then there was no looking back. The 2 things that I had to do was that we did a lot of seminars to disseminate technology because people had to understand the benefits of technology. They had to understand how such costlier machines could actually give them benefits and actually make them more profitable than before. That was one thing. And the second thing which I had to do was, because there's no substitute for good old traditional hard work. There's not a place I had not traveled to where there could be a possibility of having a loom. When the opportunities came, Hagihara from Japan and Phyllis from Taiwan jumped in. So this was new resistance. This was a new challenge. And I think we could overcome this challenge very, very comfortably by proving our technologies being better and through providing better service, through providing greater amount of knowledge to our, imparting greater amount of knowledge to our customers. I think these are the attributes which helped us to drive them out from the competitive arena.
How interesting and motivating story. A handwritten contract. I've never heard that in my life. I'm sure it could actually become one of the key elements of a museum if Indian plastic industry would ever have to make one. How the machinery sector has influenced the growth and revolution in flexi and packaging in India over the decades. And how do you see the future?
India had to go forward. I think we had a huge commitment to India as such, leaving aside the fact that every company wants to conquer a market. There was a huge amount of commitment to India. And therefore, we decided to invest our effort and money into Indian market. And if you see from that time, from those tiny lines and from mostly local equipment, but also some tiny small lines for barrier films coming from outside, we started to supply larger lines, so higher outputs, higher technologies, and altogether new concepts of producing the flexible packaging were introduced in the Indian market by us. And therefore, if you look at it now, people used to tell me at that time, I would go to a customer and they would say, we want technology which is appropriate for India, which meant cheap. But then we were in a business which would not come cheap. It would only come best. And best is never cheap. So there was this question. And now we have come, look at the transition which has happened. This is where I'm coming. The transition has happened in such a way that today when you go to a customer, he is not willing to talk to you about something which is less than the most advanced. So the whole concept got inverted. I think this was the biggest transformation which happened, not only in the industry, how it works, but also in the mindsets of the people who were setting up the industry. And I think this was the big achievement. And if you look at it now, India has machines which are as good as anywhere in the world. They are the latest technology. You see multi-layer, up to 9-layer lines, maybe 11-layer lines would be coming. You see nanotechnology on cast film lines in India today. You see barrier cast film lines. You see downward extrusion 9-layer films, which are most sophisticated actually in the world. So I think India is today standing at a point where it can really boast of producing truly world-class packaging, which is both in terms of quality and attributes are absolutely comparable to anywhere in the world.
That is such heartening to hear, sir. Sir, the Indian machinery manufacturers, do they need to do anything further so that they become at par with the world standards?
I think, Indian machinery manufacturers do a good job for the price that they charge. I would, my hats off to them and all 100% marks to them for that. But I have always the feeling that we could do better, because in any case, everyone can do better. There's no one who can't do better. And therefore, I think this is time that they look at certain other things. I think in terms of research and development, in terms of training and upskilling of their workers, in terms of not depending purely on foreign technologies, but trying to start developing technologies within the country or perfecting them, or let's say even if there are foreign technologies available, I would say not to reinvent the wheel, but to work on them and to make them affordable for India. The day they can achieve this position, they will also conquer the world market. If we can make those technologies affordable for India, we can make them affordable for the whole world. We can go back to the same market from where we import today, and we can stand up and say, look here, I've got something which is as good as yours, maybe better. That's what they should be doing. And for this, I think the scope is huge. It's a matter of mindset. They have to think big. The bigger they think, the bigger they will be.
Rakesh sir, I know of your very strong faith in God and our Indian scriptures. I have myself heard you quoting a lot from there. In this crisis time, sir, what learnings can you draw from there and share with our viewers?
This is a very big question, Nidhi, because what we are talking about is you are asking me to condense an ocean into a cup, into a teacup, because that is how big it is. But okay, let me try. I think, first of all, let me say that this has little to do with the current crisis, because the learnings which we have from our scriptures, the important lessons we have from the scriptures are totally timeless. They are completely timeless. They are eternal. They are for all times. They have, the scriptures are as modern as they were at the time they were written. And therefore, it is for all the time. Let me say, I will start with Bhagwan Ram's life. It was the biggest learning from his life and his work is for me is that no matter how the difficulties are, how bad the difficulties are, it doesn't matter how a challenge confronts you. It doesn't matter. In all cases, you can convert every challenge into an opportunity, which he did. He converted it into an opportunity by establishing the rule of law all over this southern peninsula, and by killing Ravan and many other evil people, he made the world a much better place to live. So therefore, in front of all kinds of odds, one should not lose patience. One must continue on the path of righteousness. One must do the right thing. So what I learned most of all from his character is patience, exquisite planning, flawless execution, and complete calm and equanimity under all stressful situations. These are the lessons I draw from Ram. The second lesson which I draw from him is about leadership. Imagine the enemy that he was facing was extremely sophisticated in terms of technologies. They had flying machines, they had all kinds of weapons, they had everything. And Ram was one man with weapons and his brother. And he created an army of people who were much less sophisticated. And he won the war. He conquered such an indomitable enemy with a team or with an army of people who were much less in any way. And therefore, the only thing that could have made it happen was his leadership. This is a huge example in leadership. I'll take a little more time. From Mahabharata also, there are some great learnings. One is that no matter what, the most important thing to do is to do one's duty with total commitment, and with, no matter how difficult the odds may be. It also teaches us to think carefully before doing or saying anything to prevent adverse consequences, because we know the consequences which happened in the story with the Pandavas because of their hasty commitments and hasty comments and hasty decisions. The character of Bhagavan Krishna also, which is again something very outstanding. He is a tremendous example of mentorship. I think he is a mentor from which any managers anywhere in the world can take huge lessons.
Ladies and gentlemen, today we have with us our second guest on the special Golden Boy series on eve of the 50th milestone episode, Dr. D.D. Kale. Professor D.D. Kale, a PhD from University of Salford, UK, with a teaching experience of at least 40 years. He retired from UDCT in 2005 as a professor of polymer technology and as HOD of polymer engineering. At present, he's a technical director with an organization and is a consultant to plastic industry. He is member of various expert committees. Reviewed the Centers of Excellence set up by DCPC, Expert Panel for Centers of Excellence by DCPC, to Government of Maharashtra on environmental issues, to define single-use plastics set up by Ministry of Chemicals and Fertilizers, and to define single-use plastics by Government of India. He has guided 28 PhDs and 65 master students, published more than 100 papers, and also has a patent to his credit. Our teacher, our guru, Pranam. Blessed to have you, sir, with us on the show, Insights with Nidhi Verma.
Thank you very much, Nidhi. Very nice introduction. And I look forward to your questions. I hope I pass all your questions.
Role reversal. So, how do you see the polymer market future in the next 1 year in India, with the capacity augmentations coming up and also the availability of resins from overseas?
Yeah, good question. With lockdown, the market has definitely come down. I would say that if you compare the market at December 19, and if we compare that as our base, then it will take at least by about January, February of 2021 to reach the same level of about 90% of that. Then it might increase. And I feel that our compound annual growth rate was about 8 to 10% earlier. To reach that stage, it might take end of 21 or beginning of 2020. This is the way I see this, because there are so many reasons for this. I mean, see, there is a demand, but the industry has to be set up for that. Workforce has to be there. Transportation has to be proper, because raw material has to come to the converter. After he converts, the finished goods have to go to the customer. Then malls are not working, restaurants are not working. So it will take before this entire supply chain stabilizes itself.
So do you think that our polymer engineering facilities in India, they are at par with the foreign standards of education?
Well, that's a very tricky question you are asking me, but I'll still answer that. When it comes to the standards are definitely not comparable with many American universities. I don't say that their knowledge level is different or something. It's the manner in which those universities work, the kind of facilities, kind of freedom that the students get, and the kind of restrictions that our universities have. So I would say this way, that if you consider our education in India, in the universities, first we'll take universities. Again, that I'll divide into two parts, undergraduate and postgraduate. Undergraduate is reasonably okay. They are producing some reasonably good students. But when it comes to postgraduate students, where you require expertise, where you require what you should say paradigm shift in the manner in which you are looking at something. It is not, you are not giving them extra knowledge, not the extra chemistry that they learn, but they learn the philosophy of science, philosophy of going details, philosophy of being at the top of the world. So these are the things which are missing in our university. One of the reasons is that our UG faculty and again PG faculty. So the faculty is inadequate to begin with. I've visited many universities and center of excellence over last few months, I would say. It is not adequate. B, facility is not at the top. And number C is that most of the faculty is not equipped or they are not on par with what is happening globally. If for research, you must know either you are solving a general problem of research whereby anybody can benefit. And another thing is that development some technology specific to some industry or to country. We are not familiar with what our society needs, how we should take up the projects, how much time it will require to develop the technology. Giving some kind of a science-based information is one thing. Solving that particular problem is okay. I can prepare one component and say, hey, my properties are very good. But that is not technology. Technology transfer is a separate game altogether. We are not very familiar with IPR facilities. We are not very happy. We are not used to this kind of things. You need some kind of an experience for doing this. And therefore, I feel that if you compare the higher education, we are not on par with them for most of the cases. I'm not talking about top-notch universities or top-notch institutes. They are doing very well. Like if you take IITs or some universities like ICT, well, they are on par. But how many students can go there?
So what steps do you think the Indian plastic industry needs to take so that we can capture at least a pie of the manufacturing from China if it's going to get out of there?
A very, very large issue. China, whatever they have done today, has been over last several decades. It's not several, at least 2 decades. They had this policy. All the industry, what we see their development, unfortunately, very few people talk about this. It is not on a sustainable basis. What I mean is that it's all government which is pumping in money. Government is pumping for the infrastructure. How long they can sustain this kind of a support, that is a questionable mark. However, they have done it. Now, all of a sudden, if we say China is going out of the market and therefore India can fill it, that's not possible. You may like to know that when many industries were thinking from Europe and other, you know who were the competitors with India? Taiwan and countries like Vietnam. Even today, Vietnam doesn't have any polymer manufacturing activity. They don't have any machinery manufacture in a big way. However, 5 to 6% of US film-based market is going from Vietnam. You can imagine that they are just producing the quantum which is required for that market. So these people are thinking whether they should come to India or go somewhere else. And those countries, although they are small, they are in competition. Now, as far as India is concerned, what can we say? That A, we must have a plan. That okay, can we make very high critical items or we can make non-critical items, like run of the mill. I remember in one of your interviews, Tapareji had said that India should produce 20 times more material. I fully agree with him. But how will you make that? Somebody has to make it happen. What we need? More polymer. That is no big issue. Do we have enough number of people who will work in this one? Answer may be no. Now, if you look at what products were going from China to US, and if we see what we can do here, we don't have to go for rocket science. Even let us say balloons, or we used to play a game in our childhood that we make soap solution and make bubbles with blowing the air. Now I have seen a video where that balloon is about 10 to 12 feet long. Now that is just making a small addition of some polymers into this. Now we can think like that. There are many polymeric products. I'm just giving this as an example. So what I'm saying is that our MSME do not know whether they can do it. If they have to do this, what is the way that we need to change? Because it's nothing but changing their present situation. And what we say, they have got X machine, they want to supplement what Y machine they will need. Skilled workers we don't have. Now we need to have all these facilities. Transportation and other infrastructure has to be best quality. Our packing, what we do, is not what is suitable for transporting it to the other country. It has to be developed. Not that we cannot do it. We never had a chance to do it on a large scale. Some small picker people are there. There are some numbers which are going. That has to increase. So when you asked me some question previously, just before this, about engineering and our universities, what we need for this is not large number of universities perhaps. What we need is large number of institutes like CPET or ITI, because they produce the shop floor people. Their main job is to do that. Yes. Now nobody talks about investing in another institute, private institute like CPET. We talk of universities, but we don't talk about these institutes. So if some industries can come together, group of industries can join hands together and see that yes, we develop this kind of thing. Maybe what we can call incubation center. That you have got one small machine, you can start learning and then go back and start producing. Association should come forward, because unless and until we do it as a system, it will not work. Otherwise, what will happen? Some associations will put in money and their chairman and this thing will say, we want to control this. And the whole purpose will be lost. That should not happen. It should be on its own. It should have some free hand and it should be treated like an institute. That they say that, okay, this is my strength. I'll bring it more on this and you build another one. So both of us will grow. It's not cutthroat that, okay, I'll copy what the other man is doing and I'll ruin him and as well as myself. That will not. This is the way I look at in the industry. There's a big opportunity. If we don't use this now, in another year or so, other countries will take over. And those countries are like Vietnam, Philippines, Bangladesh. They will take over from us.
I think these words, the academia as well as the industry, as well as the policy makers, they should take very seriously, because what you're saying is should be the path forward if we need to take away a little bit of that pie also. Sir, you are an active member of SUP. What are your views considering India's position? There are a lot of models being talked about. Which one do you think will work?
Well, that's again very, what I should say, question which has multiple aspects and it's very difficult to say something straight away. First of all, SUP banning is not the solution according to me. We must look at all the polymer products. What is the problem? Everybody says, including UNEP, that, well, plastic is not a problem. The way we use it is a problem. That's one thing. Everybody talks about ocean being littered with plastic bags. Plastic bags don't walk into the ocean. We throw them, right? Or they fly off and then we go there. So what we have to see is that we have expertise in recycling. You may know that India is the first country to start the industrial recycling. We did not do it because we love the environment, but it was economic reasons. Way back in 1970s, the plastic industry, recycling industry has started in India. So we have got 40, 50 years of experience, and yet we are not taking any leading edge for that. So if you look at this particular aspect, we definitely have expertise, but we are not doing the things in a scientific. Chalta hai. Who are the people who are doing it? What do? They have some machine, they put something, you pelletize, you make some product and say, okay, we have recycled. We have not looked at chemical recycling. We have not looked at feedstock recycling. Now, I'm saying this because SUPs are coming into this recycling part. That's the reason I'm saying this. Now, chemical recycling and these things, if you look at it today, 5% of crude goes into polymers and 60% of that goes in packaging and 60% of that may be going into the waste. So about 3% or 4% of total crude related to this waste is there. Now plastic has come from crude, so crude can come from plastic now, but it will be 2% only. So it will be a mini refinery. So whether people can think of doing the projects, doing this, use it as a feedstock. You may not make polyethylene from that because you're not talking about mega refinery, you're talking about mini refinery. But then you can think of making oligomers, you can think of making straight chain polymers, straight chain fuels. sky is the limit. But we have not looked into that chemistry from the technological development point of view. Chemistry exists. Only thing we have to think how we can use it and what is the scale of operation, how we should go about it. Even that evaluation. Okay, if I do like this at this scale, it is operable. If I go less than that, it is not good. Maybe this data have been analyzed by the big giants who are into refinery business. But they must have seen that 1 or 2% why we should go, not our approach. But they have got the expertise. You can join hands with them to say, okay, I'll augment this. Or you help us on this technology and we'll do this. We'll not enter into your field anyway. Small scale fellows cannot fight with the giants. But then they need not produce polyethylene. They can produce something else. Ethylene can be used for so many things. So one can produce even the methane. From methane, one can go to many other chemicals. I can tell you that there is a big opportunity because petrochemical business is really a big one. And C1, C2, C3, C8, these are the pillars. And these will all come from recycling plastic waste. When you say what India can do, take the leadership because we are already leader as far as the total number of recycling parameters are concerned. We recycle more than 60% when world average is 10%. Now still we are being blamed, that okay, you are the one who are producing maximum bag materials. That is because we are following blindly. Ban this, ban that. That is not the solution. Waste management, do it perfect. And if we can develop a good waste management principle, if we can show the end of life solution either in road, cement kiln, chemical feedstock, or even you just pelletize that and burn along with the fuel, say diesel, 10% of boiler feed will be with plastic waste. Why we should worry about cement kiln that 7% should go into that? It can also go in other fuels also. Then many countries will follow you. They would like to have this technology. We don't talk about advanced countries like US or some European countries, but look at African countries, look at Asian countries, look at South American countries, and other fields where we can really get into our agricultural or packaging waste packaging, because packaging is very poor. We still lose a lot of, and if we can do proper packaging, that's the area where we can definitely go. Polymers related in electronics will come. Some of this, what I should say, thermoset resins will be picking up. Big industries, we are followers, but small industries, we can be the leaders.
Sir, thank you so much. I think there's so many options available. Only the opportunities have to be seeked out and then seen that what makes business viability. And it looks very optimistic there. Sir, the government is planning to do the uniform EPR policy. A lot of work is going around there because the last date is, I think, already there. What
Yes.
are your thoughts on that, sir? Very important topic.
What I should say, very important topic, very contemporary topic, and we are still grappling around. World over, there is no single uniform EPR policy because the lifestyles of world is different than lifestyle in India. I personally believe that fee-based model is the best for India. Fee-based model has again two parts. One is PRO-based and one is non-PRO-based. I go for non-PRO-based. That is my personal opinion. I'll explain to you what I mean. Basically, if you look at it, you take the example like Mumbai, big city, any corporations like Mumbai, Calcutta, Delhi, collection of waste may be relatively simple. It can be organized well. It can be sold properly because all the waste pickers, kabadiwalas and all that supply chain is already established in these big cities. Go 50, 60 kilometers away from Mumbai. What is the situation? Nobody wants to pick up any kachra on the road, number one. Number two, if somebody wants to do some recycling, there is no facility. So it has to be transported from those 50, 60 kilometers to Mumbai. Transportation cost will be killing you. Therefore, nobody does it. So what happens? It remains litter. Now, if you look at PWM rules 2016, they have said collection and segregation is the responsibility of local bodies, like either ULBs or Gram Panchayat. If you look at some figures, you will be astonished that in Maharashtra alone, there are about 95,000 Gram Panchayat. Imagine for the whole country how many Gram Panchayat will be. Now, let us say Maharashtra as a model. We consider collection from all the parts, from the village by Gram Panchayat. They will collect, segregate. There is nobody to pick up or any recycle, so they will take it to maybe taluka place or town somewhere. There's some cost involved in that. Now, collection of waste from the domestic house to house again is not being done very properly. People still throw it on the road. There are not enough dustbins. So all these things will have to be augmented. Now, ULBs don't have the capacity perhaps or the new equipment or technology to handle such a big quantum of waste. They can hire the people. So what they can do, they can throw tenders so that there are people who will collect it. They will be given identity card. They will be given everything as per the any corporate. So tendering will remove all the hanky-panky and there will be a transparent system. So they will be doing on one side collection, segregation. Then good part can be sold. So again, ULBs can send the tenders that this is the available material here. Who wants to buy this? This is available at this rate. So they will get some revenue. Now, transportation and this thing from the other small states will cost you more money. You combine all the cost on one side and revenue on the other side. Now, after doing this, you will still find that there is some material which nobody wants, like multi-layer packaging. Plastic containing multi-layer may have your polyethylene, polypropylene, polyester, paper, metallic, everything. Now, that can be compacted and incinerated to generate power or without generation of power. Now, this model is working very well in Japan. In Japan, the data very clearly shows that they mechanical recycling is only about 60%. Up to 30% is being used for incineration generating power. And remaining part, about 5%, is in such a remote place that incineration for generation of power is expensive. So they incinerate there and there itself. So only 1 or 2% remains unaccounted for, or it goes to the landfill. Now, if they can do it in a systematic way, why we can't do it? We are also short of power today. We can generate power. Suppose there is no power being generated. So again, if you look at the whole picture together, collection cost, segregation cost, incineration cost. That includes, collection cost includes the transportation from small places. X, revenue is Y. Most likely X will be much larger than Y. So X minus Y, which is called as a viability gap, can be considered as EPR liability. Now, whom to charge is a big issue. When I was sitting in one of the ministries, people wanted to have it one point collection so that it becomes easy. Then it's easy for what you can say implementing this also. So everybody says raw material manufacturers should be held for this. I mean, that is the one, they are the people who are producing, so why not charge them? I said, for them, there will not be difficult because they are organized. But if you look at our tax structure today, they are being charged GST. Now, you can't charge another EPR tax on them. So it is not possible. And if you look at it, when they produce the polymeric resin, they have followed all the norms of pollution as per the international standards. Now, when they put it in the market, what are they putting? Are they putting plastic film or plastic pellets? Answer is they put plastic pellets. So that is not possible. So next point that could be considered the distributors. Can we put them in the picture? Now, I do not know the tax structure today, so I cannot come in. Then it was said that if that is not feasible, then next person are the producers who convert that for the first time and put in the market, as well as the imported material. Now, we know that if we have less number of people whom we can charge, it becomes easy to implement. Otherwise, how many inspectors will require just to see that whether somebody is following it or not? How much documentation will have to do? Here, the documentation will be much less. For the industry, you make one-time payment and forget about it, you will do the business. Now, this needs to be developed properly. There may be some laws, there may be some flaws. And I'm suggesting that rather than worrying about all this initially, let us first set the targets for proper collection and segregation. I want to more than 15 years to come to the level of 80% plus for the collection efficiency. Now we can also achieve, our efficiency is not that high. So we can put 5-year target. The geographical changes that we have from Himalayas to Kerala, lifestyles are different, habits are different, way people live is different. We take into account, each state will do this exercise, all combined together is total cost, distribute across the country, and matter will be simple. Again, this model is developed. 10 countries would like to have this.
There's so much plethora of knowledge that you have, also the industry experience. So it's a beautiful combination that we have in you. And we just want to say thank you by saying Guru Brahma, Guru Vishnu, Guru Devo Maheshwara, Guru Deva Param Brahma, Tasmai Shri Guru Ve Namah. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you, Nidhi.
Blessed to have you with your blessings, with your learnings, with your knowledge that you've imparted almost the entire generation. We are only going to say thank you, sir.